Hello, welcome to another episode of In the Trenches with Gang Green. I'm your host, Bubbs. Today is Monday, December 16th. Hopefully everybody's having a good day so far today. This is episode 448 of the In the Trenches with Gang Green podcast. I thank you, as always, for joining me. For those tuning in on YouTube, make sure to please like and subscribe. Of course, appreciate all of you who are tuning in on all the different audio podcast platforms as well. We've got a lot to discuss today on the pod. It is a Monday after a win, which is a victory Monday. First time in 3 months, the New York Jets won a game on a Sunday and have a victory Monday here, the last one coming in week 2 against the Tennessee Titans. Of course, the other 2 wins both came on Thursdays, week 3 against New England, and in week 9 on Halloween against Houston, which up until yesterday was the New York Jets' last win as they went on that 4-game losing streak with the bye week mixed in. So it's been well over a month since the New York Jets won a football game up until yesterday to pick up their 4th win of the season. Today, obviously, I'll break down some more takeaways. I want to get into Olu Fashanu. I want to get into the Jets' offensive line because that was a positive. That has been a positive this season, how that impacts things moving forward in the future. I also want to get to Aaron Rodgers. The debate has begun to heat up once again today after Rodgers went out there yesterday, threw for 3 touchdowns and over 289 yards. Or 3 touchdowns, rather, and 289 yards to get to 23 touchdowns on the season, over 3,200 yards on the year. The debate today has started to been brought up. Should Rodgers come back next year? Should he not? We'll take a look at both sides and talk about it a little bit later on as well. As always, though, before we begin, let me tell you about our podcast partners, starting with our friends over at BetUS. If you're looking to get on any of the betting action across any sport, college football, playoffs right around the corner, starting up this week, college basketball, NBA, NHL, NFL, final 3 weeks of the regular season. Enjoy it, football fans. Postseason coming up. Any action, do it over on America's favorite online sportsbook, BetUS, and use my link in the description of this video to get a 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000. Also, our friends over at SeatGeek, if you're looking to get out to the Jets game this Sunday, if you're a Rams fan looking to get out to the Jets game this upcoming Sunday, if you're looking to get out to any sporting event, any play, concert, show, you name it, SeatGeek has it. And if it's your first time using SeatGeek, use promo code BUBSONSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase and get yourself out to some awesome events. And, of course, Huga House. You see me wear my Huga House hat all the time on the podcast. If you want any of their awesome selections of hats, use promo code BUBS for 15% off any purchase and get yourself some really nice swag. Another day, another episode, another week. Week 16, right around the corner, 3 games left. Jets pick up a win yesterday. First win since Halloween, snapped the 4-game losing streak. Obviously, a win that was split amongst the fan base. Tank, do you win? Do you tank? Whatever. They won. So you move on and see what happens here over the next 3 games. Episode 448 here of the podcast. I wanted to break down a couple different things today, as we usually do on these Monday shows coming off of the games on Sunday. I wanted to first start off with the offensive line, and specifically Olu Fashanu. And obviously, look, I know it's heavily debated on whether or not people wanted them to win yesterday, lose yesterday. I think you've got to take that out of the equation here when you're talking about Olu, when you're talking about this offensive line, because this offensive line and Olu recently here have been really big positives and have really been positives for the majority of the season, right? Olu went out there week 10, took over for Tyron Smith against the Arizona Cardinals, got the start in week 11, and has looked very good. And the offensive line this season, for the most part as well, has looked very good. There has definitely been some slip-ups. There's obviously been some injuries, no doubt about it. But for the most part, it's been one of the consistent pieces of this team. And one of the things that you can actually walk away from this season is knowing that you've got a solid foundation on the offensive line. It looks like you've got your franchise left tackle. You've got a really good center. You've got two really solid guards. Maybe you reevaluate what happens with Morgan Moses, but if you were to bring him back next year on a one-year contract, I don't think that's the end of the world either. So even while this team has been losing, and even whether or not you're upset or happy about the win yesterday, take all that out of it. This offensive line deserves some praise. They deserve some credit, and Olu especially, because at this point in the season, and I say this a lot, right? At this point in the year when the team's eliminated, especially a season like this where it's been so disappointing, there's been so many guys that are supposed to be stepping up in big ways that have had really poor seasons. We all know it. You start to look at individuals, and you start to look at the young guys. You start to look at guys like Olu. Yesterday was another opportunity to see what Braylon Allen could do, to see what Isaiah Davis can do. Last week against Miami, when Breece Hall was out, was an excellent opportunity for those two young running backs. Heck, yesterday Quantez Stiggers made his debut, so you got to see him in action. You kind of get to see some of these other guys in action, kind of get to see what these guys are all about, if they're pieces for the future, if they show you enough, all that good stuff. And Olu has been excellent. And I've said this many, many times. As bad as this season has been, as frustrating as this season has been, and as much as you go into the offseason from a coaching perspective, and you have questions about whether or not the Jets are a good destination or not, whether or not they're a destination that many coaches would want to come to, one thing you can say about this team is it's been a while since they solved the quarterback and left tackle equation. It's been a while, especially under Douglas. We all know they couldn't do it. Between Dwayne Brown, between obviously Becton was a bust. You feel like you finally got one half of that equation done. And that makes life a lot easier for the next head coach, next GM that comes in here, is at least knowing that it feels like you've got a franchise left tackle. Now, you still need to find your franchise quarterback. You still need to find the guy. Even if Rodgers comes back next year, he's not the future. So you still need to figure that out. But for how many years now have we gone into the offseason with questions at left tackle? Really, since the Brickashaw-Ferguson. It's been a while. That's how long it's been. Olu and Joe Tippmann here early on are giving you vibes of maybe those are your modern day Mangold and DeBrickashaw. And that would be awesome. And we've been waiting for that for a very long time. There's been so many different centers, so many left tackles since that point. And now it feels like you've hit on a second-year center, a center in his second year, and a rookie at left tackle who's since taking over in that Arizona game and officially as a starter in Week 11 has been excellent. And I'll read you some numbers here, but I also just think the tape has been beautiful. You watch some of these reps from Olu. They're phenomenal. And yesterday was, I think, one of the most impressive performances of his season, just because of the guy he was going up against. Josh Hines-Allen is one of the underrated, one of the better, more consistent pass rushers in the NFL. I talked about this in the game preview. Allen came into the game with 7 sacks on the season, 15 quarterback hits, and 8 tackles for loss. The Jaguars as a team only had 25 sacks going into yesterday. Hines-Allen and Trayvon Walker, their two dynamic edge rushers, had 15 and a half of those 25 sacks going into yesterday's game. And what did Olu do? Well, he shut Hines-Allen down. What did the Jets offensive line do? Well, they pretty much shut down the Jaguars, because even Morgan Moses on that right side, who's been dealing with so many injuries this year and has been a warrior, he shut down Trayvon Walker. When you look at Olu yesterday, 80.5 PFF pass block rate. That was the highest on the team. On top of that, 1 pressure allowed on 58 snaps. And I've talked about how wasn't just last week. It wasn't just a week before. This has been a good, solid month now of Olu playing at a high level. because since week 10, he has a 77.1 PFF pass block grade. He looked phenomenal. And ideally, as a Jeff fan, I know the whole Douglas track record. You're still kind of saying to yourself, okay, let's see how it goes. But this was a guy coming out of college that was arguably the best pass blocker in the draft. Now, Joe Alt was the best all-around offensive lineman. But from a pass blocking perspective, from pass pro perspective, it was Olu Fashanu. And it finally feels like the Jets have their answer. It doesn't feel like it. They do. This guy is legit. You just watch these reps and you watch him dominate these one-on-one reps. It looks like a guy that has been in the league for a very, very long time. His hand placement's been perfect. His footwork's very good. And as much as Tyron Smith struggled this season, and as much as he was a disappointment for the most part, I think you do have to give some credit to Tyron Smith from a leadership perspective. I don't know if Olu Fashanu would be this good right now if he was sitting behind Dwayne Brown or sitting behind, I don't know, an average old left tackle that's not very good. Seeing Tyron Smith, not only just watching him, but seeing how he goes about his business, and more so Tyron Smith from a mental perspective, his smarts of the game, I think has really benefited Olu for his ability to come in and have an extremely high IQ, have very, very good technique, and look like a guy that isn't in his, that didn't, Olu yesterday did not look like a guy that was in just his fourth game, his fourth start of his career. He didn't. And he hasn't looked that way. Against Seattle, same thing. He had 42 pass blocking snaps against Seattle, did not allow a single pressure. Yesterday, just one pressure over 58, was very good against Miami. I think one of the biggest parts of that Miami game was his ability on that Isaiah Davis run to open up a lane for him, showing his ability to run block. That while it still could use some improvement, that is still an area of his game that can certainly turn into a strength. And Tippmann as well on that play had a really big piece of Davis having that lane to make to get that 17-yard touchdown last week. So as bad as this season has been, Olu's been one of the constants down the stretch, especially down the stretch here where, you know, when Olu came in, it was that Arizona game. They fell to 3-7. That was like officially the end, right? If they would have won that game, you get to 4-6, right? We know obviously nothing probably would have ever happened, but you get to 4-6 at that point. Who knows? Maybe you beat Indy, you get to 5-6 by the bye, the whole thing, they're still in it. Whatever. I'm not going to go down the what if path, but especially over the last 4 games, which has been a lot of doom and gloom. You officially clinched the losing season against Seattle. You officially got eliminated last week. It's been so much doom and gloom. It's been a lot of, as a Jet fan, just realizing that it's another year without playoffs officially, all this stuff, really looking ahead to the offseason. You fired Douglas, of course, during that time. Olu's been one of the only bright spots, been one of those lone bright spots. And really the Jets offensive line as a whole. You know, look, I get they're 4-10, and I'm not trying to sit here and, you know, I'm not trying to sit here and tell you that this team is right there. No, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But the offensive line's been solid this year. And again, I don't want to be negative every single podcast I come on here. I don't want to just sit here and just sulk and be negative and talk about everything bad, how everything's so bad. Try and bring up a positive here. The offensive line's been good this year. And I will not, it's not even why I'm talking about the offensive line right now is because they're good. It's more so because there's so many people out there. I think you could even make the case the Jets offensive line this year has been underrated. And there's a lot of people in the media, even some Jets fans themselves, but I would say it's more so the people in the media have been like, you got to fix the offensive line. You've got to draft an offensive lineman. I don't think that's the case. Now, maybe you look at a plan at right tackle because maybe you bring Morgan Moses back next year. Like, I wouldn't be against that because, look, you have some continuity for once. How many years in a row do we have the Jets have different pieces on the offensive line? For at least 2025, you've got Simpson on a 2-year deal. You still got ABT for another year. Now, you have to evaluate him at the end of next year because with the whole 5th year and stuff like that, obviously. I didn't pick it up, but evaluate him at that point. Tippmann's only in his 2nd year. Now, Tippmann being a non-first round pick. He'll have 2 more years left technically. Olu's only in year 1. He's a first-round pick. Olu will be here for a long time. Ideally, Olu is your future. But I think there's been a common theme. Like the media, everybody's saying the Jets offensive line, they need to fix the offensive line. Everybody's, the offensive line has been good. That's just not true. That's just not false. I think that right there, when somebody says that, you have not watched a single game this year. You have not watched a single snap this season of this football team if you think the offensive line has been a problem. Has there been moments? Sure. They were not good in the Minnesota game, and they were terrible against Denver. They were not good against 2 teams that blitzed the heck out of them. I'm not doubting that. But compared to what they were last year, compared to what they've been, especially since Douglas took over, how he built that line, this was by far the best, I guess, Douglas line he's ever had. And the best line we've seen in a very long time with this team. I think you can make the case this is probably the best offense line this team has had since the 2015 season. Not as good as the 2009, 2010 teams, but definitely probably 2015, you can make that case. Olu, foundational piece. Tittman, foundational piece. John Simpson's having a career year. AVT, I think, kind of gets thrown on the bus a lot. I think AVT gets maybe a little bit more criticism than he deserves. I think a lot of it's the injuries. People look at him as a guy that's dealt with a lot of injuries even this year and say, oh, I don't know, he's but when he's out there, he's solid. And Moses is a warrior. He's a very good veteran that even playing through injuries has been very good this year. And I think Morgan Moses' impact has been felt when you really could tell how valuable a guy is when he's not out there. You look at when Morgan Moses has had to miss time during games this year. Carter Warren's awful, and Max Mitchell sometimes isn't even active. And I do get that point. I do think the Jets need to come away with this draft with the right tackle. I don't know if that'll be first round. I think if you're not, I think you got to go quarterback. Potentially, wherever you end up in the draft, we'll see once these final 3 weeks are over. I think, you look at the defensive line, I think that's a massive, massive need. I would take a guy like a Mason Graham over a right tackle in the first round. But you could still look at a more future piece at right tackle. But other than that, 4 of your 5 spots are in, potentially 5. I mean, keep some continuity. Have the same 5 out there next year, week 1. I don't think that'd be solid. But there's a common theme of people saying, oh, the Jets offensive line's a problem. They got to fix it in the offseason. That's simply not true. The offensive line has been one of the lone bright spots. You can make the case the offensive line has been the best part of the offense this year. With Rodgers having an up and down season, probably Garrett Wilson. But in terms of like overall position groups, it's been the offensive line probably. Running game's been up and down. Tight ends have been awful. Rodgers have been up and down. Receivers, outside of Garrett Wilson, it's been very inconsistent. Devontae's had 2 great weeks, but there was some weeks there where he wasn't much of a factor. You traded Mike Williams. Malachi Coy is a non-factor. Gibson doesn't do anything. Lazard was placed on IR. The receiving group outside of Garrett is a lot of inconsistencies. A lot of it. Offensive line, not so much. Very good. And Olu's the headline. And I think that's a positive. Whether you're rooting for wins, rooting for losses, upset about draft position, happy they won. I think one thing we can agree as Jet fans as we sit here on Monday, December 16th, is you've got your franchise left tackle. And for a destination that is not very, very appealing, it makes it a little bit more appealing because, well, the 2 foundational pieces that a team needs to succeed on offense, a team needs to succeed as a whole, is a left tackle and a quarterback. Well, they've got the left tackle. Next is figuring out what you're doing with the quarterback. And that transitions me perfectly into my next segment about Aaron Rodgers and the future of Aaron Rodgers. As of now, Rodgers currently sits, as we do this episode here on a Monday afternoon, just 8 or 9 days away from Christmas. Rodgers has completed 305 of 488 passes for a 62.5 completion percentage, 3,255 yards, 6.7 yards per completion, 23 touchdowns, 8 picks, a 90.8 passer rating, and a 53.9 QBR. He's 11th in yards this season in the NFL. He's tied for 7th in touchdown passes, and he's 22nd in QBR. Now, I think one of the most important things here when you bring up the whole Rodgers argument is after the bye week, we talked about Rodgers and said 6 games left, right? You had the Douglas firing and during the bye week. You had the bombshell report from The Athletic come out during the bye week. And a lot of it was saying they might bench Rodgers. Woody's ready to move on. Rodgers, you heard that report that he wants to play in 2025, or he doesn't want to play for the Jets, or was it he didn't want to play for the Jets, but he wanted to play in 25? I forget. Either way, in the article, it said that he didn't want to play. He didn't want to be with Jet. Whatever his choice, it was either he didn't want to play at all in 2025 or he wanted to play, but he wanted it to be elsewhere. Either way, his future was not with the Jets, according to the article. You had all that stuff. So a lot of fans, the Jets themselves, kind of, it's like you looked at Rodgers here as a 6-game, I don't want to say tryout, but a 6-game examination in a way, where you had to see, okay, coming out of the bye week, they were 3-8 all year. The problems with Rodgers, a lot of people have said Rodgers himself he's been not healthy. First 3 weeks of the season, he was healthy. That New England game was like his peak. And then he got beat up in that Denver game, got even worse in that Minnesota game, and wasn't the same from there on out. That started the whole 5-game losing streak. We all know Saleh fired, all that stuff. So you come out of the bye week and you're like, okay, he's healthy. He's had a week off. And now it's the final 6-game stretch. What can he do? Seattle game was in. He did some good in the first half, fell off in the second half. The pick 6 was awful. He had the wide open miss to Garrett Wilson, all of that stuff. Wasn't a good start. But over the last 2 weeks of what is a kind of a 6-game examination of Rodgers for 2025 season, he threw for 339 yards for the first time since 2021 last week and a touchdown, and had a big day yesterday, 289 yards, 3 touchdowns yesterday for a win. His second time this season, he's thrown for 3 touchdowns in a game. First came against Houston. The other came yesterday. So 2-0 in games this year where Rodgers throws for 3 touchdowns. You know, the Jets all year have talked about getting to 30 points. Who knew? All that they needed to do was just get Rodgers to 3 touchdowns, and they would win these games. And honestly, you can make the case that'd be true. I mean, if he threw 3 touchdowns, in that Indy game, if he threw another touchdown in the Indy game, they would have won. If he threw another touchdown in that Seattle game, they would have won. Another one in that Minnesota game, they would have won. Buffalo game, they would have won. That New England game, they would have won. So, yeah, you can make a case. If Rodgers threw 3 touchdowns in almost every game they lost because they were all pretty much by 1 score, they would have won. But I'm not going to sit here and go down that list. It feels like right now in this 6-game thing, 6-game season here for Rodgers, it's been 2 good games, 1 bad game. And now a lot of people, especially after yesterday's win, are bring back Rodgers, new coaching staff, bring back Devontae, and this team will be really good next year and all that stuff. Now, you know where I stand on Rodgers. I'm more in the belief of move on from him. I'm also more in the belief of I don't want this to turn into a situation where Woody Johnson over these next 3 weeks sees Rodgers still have it. And let's say they win the next 3 games and Rodgers looks great and throws, 9 touchdown passes over the next 3 games and finishes with 32 on the year. And we walk away from this season and Rodgers has got 30-plus touchdown passes, all that stuff, and then he forces it on the next head coach. I don't want that to happen because I think that's going to completely significantly decrease any candidates that are going to want to come here, and it'll mess everything up from a perspective of giving the new head coach and the general manager all the power to make decisions on their own. If Woody forces Rodgers on them, that will create a complete disaster. I also think part of what could potentially happen and why I think it's just better to clean the slate is if Woody wants Rodgers back so badly, he hires somebody that's got a history with Rodgers. So pretty much Rodgers and whoever, maybe like a McCarthy or somebody like that, bring them in so you can try and make this 1 to 2 year window that's extended work. And that'll be really backwards and it'll completely set this organization back. So we'll see what happens. But it really is interesting to see where everybody stands on Rodgers because just 2 weeks ago, I think most of the fan base, especially after that pick 6 to Leonard Williams, it wasn't like Pat Surtain or somebody like that picked him off. Leonard Williams picked him off. A defensive lineman took it back to the house 91 yards. I think everybody was dead set on Rodgers isn't coming back, nor do you want Rodgers back. But now 2 weeks later, he beats a 6-8 Miami, or looks good against a 6-8 Miami team, and in a now 3-11 Jaguars team. And now everyone's like, oh, bring Rodgers back. And that's part of it too. It's been just 2 games. And now he's finally healthy. Like, what gives you all the confidence in the world Rodgers next year at 41, going to be 42, is going to be able to stay 100% healthy all year to look like this over a 17-game season? Because Rodgers has now shown you, even if he's just a little banged up, he cannot play. He is a shell of himself. Now he's finally healthy and he looks great, but what if he gets banged up game 2, game 3 of next year, similar to this year, and then you're going down that same storyline. You're going down that same path. Now, here's the whole case, I guess, to be made for bring him back, because I did kind of look at both sides of this, both sides of the aisle. The side of the aisle to bring him back, which I would say Jets fans were kind of turning like 60-40 on moving on from him, 65-35 maybe. I don't know if it was full on 70-30. There's a lot of fans that still want him back. But I think after these 2 weeks, it's kind of more like 50-50 now. There's a lot of fans that I've seen on Twitter just jump back over where they're like, okay, I want him back. I want Devontae back. And look, bring him back, the whole case of he's the best option. Where if you want to go all in a way next year again and draft a quarterback but still be good enough next year to maybe make the playoffs, Rodgers probably gives you that best shot. Right? I don't know. I think a lot of people would make the argument you're not going to get a 23 touchdown season. You're not going to get what you're getting out of Rodgers right now, out of Tyrod Taylor, out of a Jameis Winston, out of a Justin Fields. You're not. Rodgers is the best option to compete next season. That's the whole thing, bring him back. Playing well while healthy now, that's another thing. Oh, he hasn't been healthy all year. Now he's finally healthy. Now he's playing well. Well, here's the problem. And he is finally playing well, but then again, you go anti to that. This is a guy that in that New England game couldn't finish it. Buffalo game couldn't finish it. Minnesota game couldn't finish it. Denver game couldn't finish it. Going into last week or after that Seattle game, he was 0-5 with a chance to win the game. I think also at times this season, there's been a lack of accountability from Rodgers himself. He had that quote after the Seattle game. There's 11 guys on the field. Sometimes it's my fault, and then sometimes the details aren't there in some other spots too. So there's been some of that. Blaming the wind in that game, mentioning that. But the reasons to bring him back again, best option, playing while he's healthy. Devontae probably comes back. And you can make a case if the coaching was better, kicking was better, this team would maybe be an 8-win team right now, and we wouldn't even be having this conversation. Instead, we'd be talking about a really big day from Rodgers in a game that he should have dominated against the 32nd ranked defense. Instead, we're talking about a 4-10 team beating a now 3-11 team and questioning whether or not he should return. Now, time to move on. Well, it took him until the team was 3-9 to finally play well, if we're being honest. Yes, he played well in that New England game. Yes, he had the game-winning drive against Tennessee. But outside of that, after week 3, he was not himself up until week 14. That's a while. It's a long time. And during that time, you saw this team win one football game on Halloween. They went winless in November, and they pretty much went winless in October until the final day of the regular season, or the final day of October, and it resulted in a coach being fired. The early season struggles. Another year older. This is probably the biggest one. Control on next coaching search and team vision. Is Rodgers going to want to come here with a Vrabel? And I've said this too, like, I'm not really for Rodgers coming back, but I do think it does have to ultimately come down to, and this brings up my previous point of it's got to be a coach's decision. It's got to be the next coach, the next general manager that makes the decision. it can't be Woody Johnson, as I mentioned, forcing Rodgers on somebody and saying, here, you better take him. He's going to be your quarterback. You don't have a choice. That is where the problem occurs. So it's got to be, Rodgers has got to be open to a new coach, a new scheme, a new system. No more Hackett, no more of Rodgers' friends. You know, if you hire Vrabel, it's Vrabel, it's his staff, it's his guys, and it has nothing to do with Rodgers. And the reason why that could be move on is, would Rodgers want that in potentially his final season of the NFL? Would he want to learn a new system? Would he want to have to build a relationship with a new offensive coordinator, a new head coach that he's never been with? Now, I know there was a McAfee interview that surfaced from, I think, his last year in Green Bay, talking about Vrabel and how they have a good relationship and how he likes him. That's all good. But Rodgers does also like a lot of control. He likes to kind of run his offense in a way. How would that go with a new offensive coordinator, a new offensive staff? We'll see. And then some of this could just be, Rodgers just talking, but he's mentioned a lot of, he came here because of Saleh and Douglas. Now both those guys are gone. He likes Ulbrich. He's going to be gone. Would he be open to new staff? I doubt it, but just because that's the way he is. But who knows? Maybe he does. And I'll also say this. 3/4 of the Jets' wins this season have come against teams with a combined record of 9-33. 3 of their 4 wins are against a 3-11 Jacksonville, 3-11 New England, and 3-11 Tennessee. So you talk about Rodgers showing up in big spots. One of the big reasons why we brought Rodgers here was to show up in big games, right? Was to make big plays in big moments. Well, he had that chance against Buffalo, couldn't do it. He had that chance against Minnesota. At the time, an undefeated Minnesota team couldn't do it. He had that chance against a team, even late in the year, but a team like Seattle, who I know they got blown out last night, but a playoff team. He had a chance there to continue their success. Instead, he throws a pick six, falls apart in the second half. Denver had a chance to win the game, couldn't do it. Right? Even Pittsburgh, even the Pittsburgh game. And I know a lot of it was the whole Garrett Wilson pick, but the fact that him and the offense could not recoup after that first half, and him as a leader, he's got to be able to do that on the road on Sunday night. Those are the type of games you bring Rodgers here for, is those games. Didn't play well enough, through 2 picks in that game. So, you could also make the case of Rodgers in big moments this year hasn't played well. And are we going to sit here after a Week 15 performance against a Jaguars team that who the heck knows if they're even trying to win, against Mac Jones? Are we going to sit here and going to crown Rodgers for a good game against a team that's also going to be searching for a new coach in the offseason, for a team that's playing Mac Jones? I don't know. That's just me, but you could throw that out there too. Overall, the Jets' 4 wins this season, teams are a combined record of 18-38. And believe me, a win is a win, a loss is a loss. I always say that. But Rodgers was brought here to do more than just, and that's why there's 2 sides of the aisle. You can blame Rodgers on some of this. And I always say this, Rodgers is not the main problem, but I also don't think you can consider him totally a solution. The main problems are the coaching staff and even the kicking situation. You can make a case they win that game against Denver with a better kicker. Yes. Right? I totally agree. You can also make the case, well, the offense played bad all day. They couldn't obviously adjust to the weather. The Broncos were handing them that game. That was Bo Nix in Week 4. Bo Nix was still struggling early in his career. You couldn't take advantage of had one moment where they were terrible in the red zone that day. So believe me, there is both sides of it, and that's where part of it's like you go flip-flop, that he's not a solution. You flip-flop, there's both sides of the aisle. That's where you feel like it might just be best just to clean the slate, bring in a coach, let him bring in who he wants to bring in. Maybe it's Rodgers, maybe it's not. And I've said this, if Mike Vrabel comes in here and says, I want Rodgers to be my quarterback, then I would jump on board, because I love Mike Vrabel and I would want Mike Vrabel to be our coach. So if Mike Vrabel says, hey, I want Rodgers, and Mike Vrabel becomes the next head coach of the Jets, he's my top option, then I'd be on board. You'd have to be on board. But I don't know if a coach like that would want that. I don't know if Rodgers himself would want that. I think at this point in Rodgers' career, he wants control. you know, and you're not going to have that. So, and that's where you kind of come to this consensus. I do think both sides of this argument do have to agree on this. A new head coach and the general manager need to make the decision. There needs to be a new offensive scheme. It can't be the same old vanilla offense that Rodgers has been running for years. It needs to be something new. You can't have any of Rodgers' buddies here. No more Rodgers of his friends coming to play here. No more of his coaches, none of that nonsense. And I do think we all agree that if you do keep Rodgers, you've still got to draft a quarterback. You've still got to try out Jordan Travis, Tyrod. So I think you still roll with that. And I will also say this about Rodgers. He needs to make a decision soon because we know how Rodgers is. We'll be sitting here in February after the Super Bowl and we'll still have no clue if this guy is going to play in 2025, if he's going to play for the Jets, if he's going to retire, if he's going to play for somebody else. The Jets, and I've said this, I would have done it at the bye week. It doesn't seem like they did, but you need to sit down with Aaron Rodgers. The minute the clock hits triple zeros, the day after that Dolphins game, I think it's January 6th is that Monday. You need to sit down with Rodgers that day and say, look, man, what are your plans? Or express your plans, right? Like, hey, we want you back, but it's got to be under these circumstances. We're not going to bring you back and no, we're not going to bring you back and, hire guys that you want. No, if you want to come back, you've got to come back and adapt to a new culture. You've got to adapt to a new scheme. You've got to adapt to a new coaching staff, all that stuff. And if Rodgers says, I'll do it, then great. If he says no, then you get rid of him. Then you figure out your exit plan. But you've got to figure out, do you want to come back? You present him with your plan. Does that fit you? If it doesn't, okay, then what are you going to do? Are you going to retire? Are you want us to release you? You want us to trade you? What's next? Because that's going to affect the coaching search. Ideally, you have an answer on Rodgers or you have a good feeling on Rodgers when you hire your general manager and your head coach. You can't have a general manager and head coach have no clue what Rodgers is going to do and want to come here. It's just not going to work. It's not going to work. So we'll see what happens. But let me know what you think in the comment section down below. You want Rodgers back? Don't want him back? Kind of in the middle? Because I do know there's a lot of people in the middle. It's kind of just wait and see. And that's where I am more against him coming back, but I also stand in the middle. I'm not anywhere to the side of I definitely want him back. I'm more against to the middle because I do think the best way to go about this is ultimately just letting the new coach and new general manager decide whether or not they want him back. Because if you hire a guy like Vrabel, you hire proven guys and they say, hey, I want Rodgers back. And Rodgers says, hey, I want to be back. Then you've got to trust those guys and you've got to at least trust that Rodgers is going to adapt to that because you got no other choice. What are you going to do? Complain for the next year? If those guys want him back, you've got to believe in them and you've got to roll with it, especially if it's a proven guy. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But let me know what you think in the comment section down below about the whole situation. Rodgers returning, Rodgers not returning. Only 3 more weeks left, Jets fans. Cannot wait till this season's over. Cannot wait till we get answers on these questions. Only a matter of time. So stay tuned. We'll have a lot more content coming your way. Want to get into some news around the general manager this week. I want to get into a couple coaching candidates that I think the Jets should stay away from. We've talked a lot about GM candidates that they could go after. We've talked about some head coaching candidates that they could go after. So I figured I'd create a list of a couple names that I think they should not go after. So we'll have that all coming up this week as well. So stay tuned. Appreciate you all so much. And until next time, JETS, 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 Jets.